This week's video is a special one. It's a short one, but it's a special one because today is the 3-year anniversary of my reef tank and the Anemone Cube. So this is going to basically be an update about what's going on with the tank, and I hope that you enjoy it. I'm going to include a little bit of extra footage where you can just play it as a background screensaver if that's your thing. The latest news is that I discovered that my test kit that I've been using to measure phosphate for a long time was, I guess, past its expiration date and was lying to me. So basically, it would show me there's some phosphate. I would treat the tank to lower the phosphate, and it would measure again at 0. And I was like, okay, good. And then when the measurement rose and got a little higher, based on those results, I would dose my tank. Well, when that kit ran out, I measured my tank. I was getting algae on the glass. And it was much higher with the ELOS test kit. It was measuring over 1 ppm. I was like, okay. So I've actually dosed phosphate RX pretty much every other day for the last few days to get those numbers way back down to 0 again where they belong. And it's working. But it was higher than I thought, even though my kit was telling me one thing. And because of that error, I lost some of my coral a little bit. The tip here of this acro turned white. I had a big Montipora that about a week ago just completely went up in smoke, and I was expecting, oh, your alkalinity is off, or oh, your magnesium is off, and they were perfect. And I thought, well, if those are perfect, what's going on? And I was sick at the time. And so when I finally felt better and did all my water tests, I discovered it was phosphate. Now, I don't know that phosphate can kill corals, if it's crazy high. I guess it could. I've never really thought about it because I've had corals deal with phosphate and they seem to do fine. But losing a colony about that big across that was in that middle section was kind of a bummer. But at the same time, it opened up a nice space. And I got lucky because on that big plate that had died, and it was up against the glass on the back of the tank, there was like this hideous spot where I couldn't scrape it because it was on the glass and growing on the glass. But there was like this funny little notch. And inside that notch, I found a frag of the colony. Don't explain to me how that survived when everything died around it. But that little guy was wedged in there. I lifted out. It was totally healthy. So it's right here on the sand right now. And it's, 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, 2 inches by 2 inches. Whatever that is, I have a starting point for that coral to start again, which is cool. Update on the skunk clownfish. All 11 still present and accounted for. So they're doing well. They kind of spread out. The female, I think there's one female. You would think there's one, but there's a couple large ones, so I'm kind of wondering. But anyway, I see a little bit of chasing, but they all seem to come together again, so I guess they're just working things out. I did have a little bit of cyano appear in the tank. Like I mentioned, where this coral died, it was turning red, and there was a couple spots on the top, and I'm not really worrying about it. There was a little bit down in the refugium, but I just wiped that away with a sponge. I don't know that I want to treat the entire tank because of a little tiny bit. It might be easier to just turkey baste it off the coral or siphon it out and just move on with my life rather than turn it into a big ordeal that would require a water change. And you guys know I'm behind on my water changes. On this side of the reef, it's not as pretty to me as the other side, but I do have some nice chalices down here in a favia. And this whole bird's nest has to go. It's just a big dead skeleton with life on the front. And I need that to clear out and be removed. And I think that'll create, maybe I'll put a new rock there and put some SPS on top. This green acro here I've wanted to talk about for some time. I grew that from a frag this big that came from Frank's tanks down the street from me. And there's a spot under this huge colony, under the shadow caster, there's a circle right there. That was the frag plug where this coral was. And it just grew outward to get toward the light because of that huge coral. And so it's kind of a long stick with a couple of branches. And then one day it snapped off. Maybe the corals, maybe the fish got excited and slammed into it like Spock chasing food, I don't know. But I found it down here, and so I wedged it into the Capricornus, and it has grown into quite the little beast here, considering it was just a 1-inch piece. And now it's got the blue tips again, it's got the green, it's doing really well. It's really pretty. You can see some of the purple grape Monty over there is doing well, but all my blue tort pieces that I was growing are dead because the cap covered them all, and all you see underneath them are white skeletons. And on this end of the tank, not a lot has changed other than I'm losing more and more of this hammer coral because every time it falls over into this anemone. And so the anemone eats it, and I stand it back up, and I lose more polyps. So I am tempted to grab all my hammers and zip tie them together so that way they have to stay as a unit like a bouquet. And that way they can't topple They're too large to like put some putty on it here and there, but if I zip tie them to each other so they become this mass, then when my huge tiger cowrie goes through the tank trying to get a meal, he won't knock that colony over and into this anemone. I did have a recent death. The mystery wrasse mysteriously died. I guess that's why he gets that name. And the mystery wrasse was constantly being chased by the purple tang, and maybe she had enough of them. I don't know. But I did find it behind this yellow scroll coral, and it was this mass, and there was like gel and like hideousness coming off, and I removed it from the tank, and it was in horrible shape at that point. It was like a jelly thing with, it looked like a flounder. Both eyes were on one side. So I removed it from the tank entirely. And I don't know that I'll replace it. I have one other wrasse in here. You can see him right there. That's the one that likes to rest in the hammer corals, which is kind of hilarious. He just like settles on there like he's gonna sit on an anemone. But he is the only wrasse in my tank at this point. And I just know that with wrasses, you can't put any shrimp in your tank, and they'll even eat some of your snails. So I'm thinking not to get another wrasse, and maybe even when he goes, that'll allow me to put some shrimp in the tank for fun. I'd like to put in some cleaner shrimp, some blood shrimp. I'd like to put in a banded coral shrimp. I like to say coral banded shrimp. And some other fun things that are just going to get devoured by that wrasse, so I just don't do it. I can always put them in the frag system, and I'm having a good time decorating the frag system and making it pretty. I'll show you that here in a minute. So that's kind of it for this side of the tank. Oh, I have a clip of a video I found that's old. I'm going to paste it into this video this time. It's from 3 years ago today, when I was setting up the tank, and all I had was water and some rock on the bottom. So I'm going to show you a few seconds or a minute or two of what happened back then as a throwback Thursday, because today's Thursday. It works out great. All right. So this one rock came out of my reef, and it's got stuff all over it, but this is my anemone tank, and I figured anemones can take care of any stray corals that are bothering me. I moved a couple other pieces in here just temporarily. There's one anemone. He's kind of blowing around in there. I actually found him on the vortex and pulled him back off because he doesn't belong in the vortex. And then some things are in the reef already. I've been putting things on the perimeter as I find the rocks I want for my structure. And then you can see, you can't see in the reef tank, it's pretty cloudy from everything that's been kicked up. Here are all my frags. You can see my little tiny spot here I have to fit through. It's still quite the mess in here. I put a sock on that return line again because of all this stuff that's going to be kicked up and draining into my system. And I need to adjust my skimmer because I dialed it down when the sump was so full of extra water when I was moving the livestock. I'm going to run up to the fish store and borrow a huge fish net to catch spock tomorrow. I've got Ryan and his friend are going to come over, and they're going to help me some more. We're going to take a break tonight. And I don't blame them. This is kind of a lot of work. So, you can see there's a big hole over there now, and the fish get to work on their thing. That's some pavona on the overflow that won't come off. But essentially all the corals that have been taken out came out in one piece. I didn't have like a ton of breakage or disappointment. There's a little bit of shrapnel that was cut out of the bird's nest colony. And then here's a coral that came from the Long Island Aquarium, as did this one right here. So I always keep track of those two. And that big acro, I can't believe it came out in one piece. Nice. So, still got to work on it, but this is where I am tonight. Let's go to the next tank. So this is an epic fail, and when I sat here in my editor, I discovered there is no audio connected to what you are seeing. It just doesn't come through. So the tank is 3 years old, just like the reef, and it's filled with anemones. And they are fighting for space all over the tank. And when one decides to climb up the glass, like this one right here, that's when I can make it available to someone else. A lot of the anemones in this tank are very small ones that are maybe the size of a silver dollar. And I thought they'd grow larger and then become a big one, but no. They end up splitting and you end up having lots of them. So along the top of my tank, there's probably at least 10 or 12 right there in the dead center. But down lower, this is a full-size anemone, and that's another large one. And then, of course, the rows in the back is a very large anemone. All together, they all make a beautiful home, and all 17 clownfish seem to be doing really well in the tank with no kind of hostilities and no kind of fighting. Now, what you may have noticed as you're looking in the tank is there's a blue hippo tang. That's Dory. And she is swimming around through all these tentacles, and I thought she'd live in this tank for a year or longer. But instead of what happened, she has done the unexpected. She has doubled in size. And I'm really surprised because I'm not feeding this tank heavily enough to where it's getting so much food. And with the tank getting larger and larger, apparently I'm going to have to pull it out. And it's going to have to either go into the 400-gallon, or maybe it'll end up inside the 60-gallon frag system. I haven't made up my mind. I just tried to trigger the auto feeder to get some food in the water to entice this blue tang to come out into the open so you can see her, because her markings are beautiful and there's not a spot on her body. Somehow she's avoiding all of these tentacles and not getting stung, and she gets along with all the clowns, and she's super awesome. And I kind of want to put that hippo tang inside the big reef just for the splash of color, but I think the next logical move would be to put her inside the frag system with the little yellow tang. Basically, what it comes down to is that the hippo tang has decided she is going to be too big for this tank all on her own. She didn't follow my time frame at all. The one negative that I've encountered with this anemone tank is that it also is filled with Aiptasia, which are glass anemones in the anemone family. So they have to go. There's actually so many of them cropping up, and they're like a grassy seabed inside the tank. And I wish I didn't have them. So I've been using Aiptasia X, and I've been using Aiptasia RX, trying out that new product to see how it operates with removing Aiptasia. And if you do it regularly, and not just do it once a month like I'm doing it, you'll get rid of them. But if you sit there and you do it every couple of days, every time you find another one, hit them again, and just work your way systematically, regularly, you can actually get rid of them once and for all. I need to be more proactive as a hobbyist and really address this situation. Instead of dealing with it only when I'm annoyed, I should just get in there and take care of it once and for all, so that I can just enjoy the tank and not think about it. But instead, I just let it get away from me, and you can see that's not working out so well for me. A question that I get frequently is, what do you put in this tank to make it so beautiful? It's tied into the main reef, so it's got the same filtration. Same skimmer, same heater, same calcium, alkaline, and magnesium, same Prodibio. All the things I put in the big system end up in this tank as well. And the anemones, of course, benefit from that because it's very stable and it's part of a much bigger system. My only real job is to keep these anemones out of the Vortec pump. So I have a sponge on that Vortec wet side right there, and that keeps them safe. Because anemones can wander and they can get damaged by pumps. The way my tank is set up, water comes in through an inlet and they can't be hurt there. And while they may reach up to the teeth of the overflow box, they've never actually gone through it, so they've never been harmed there. But the Vortec, that's the one spot that's dangerous to anemones. So that is why I have to take off that sponge every single night and clean it, and then put it back in place. I normally clean the sponge each night when I feed the tank. I'll turn off that pump, put the food in the tank, I let the circulation of the return move the food around in a circle so all the fish can get a meal, and that'll give me a chance to remove that sponge. If I left it on while I was feeding, the food would all stick to the sponge. So instead, while it's off, that's my perfect time to get it cleaned up, rinsed out really well, put it back on the pump, and about 15 minutes later I turn the pump back on. This tank is lit with a Radion Gen 2, the same light that's been over it for all 3 years, actually officially today. And the only thing I need to do is take down this light fixture completely, clean it out, and get all that salt creep and dust and sticky accumulation off the blades. That's a project I'll probably be doing this winter. The filtration hasn't changed much. As you've been following videos now for the last year or so, you've seen what I've been doing. There's the Nio skimmer, working just fine. I cleaned the cup today, and it's already got some waste right here. And there's some in the hose as well that will drain into the waste collector. Biopellet reactor. I did mention in the comments under the biopellet reactor that I removed the top plate entirely so it can't clog. And so far, I've seen no reason to have one there. Some people had mentioned that when they don't have the top plate in their reactor, when the power goes out and all the water siphons out or back siphons out, it back siphons the biopellets into their sump. Mine is so tall, and the way mine is set up to dump the liquid out in front of the skimmer, it can't do that. It just stays full of water. So I don't have to worry about that. But I'm seeing feather dusters growing in here. So at some point I'll have to take it apart to clean them out. But the biopellets are at the bottom. There's about this much left in the reactor right now. I tested nitrate recently. It was less than 0.1. Yeah, 0.1. Yeah, really, really low. No, less than 1. Because the kit goes from 0 to 25 ppm. So it's just under 1 ppm right now, and which means I can actually feed more. And I haven't really been doing it because I was worried about phosphate, but I'm getting that under control, and I can go ahead and feed like I want. Same calcium reactor since 2004. It was on the 280, and then it moved to the 400, and it's been with the 400 ever since in version 1.0 and in version 2.0. So 3-year anniversary, but this guy's been going for 12 years. And all I've done is replace the pump a couple of times on it. The rest of it, I just use it the way it is, and I've made a few changes as things broke. I just readapted things. And then I have a cooling fan that's actually running right now, that's mounted right here, that blows down on the sump, and the apex turns it on and off as necessary. So that's pretty much it. There was a pipe going further, used to go to the frag system, but I cut it off. And this is all going to go away. This plumbing is going to go, because I think I'm going to put them this direction. And that way I can run the tubing to the reactors this direction and not block my access to the sump at all. And that will happen when I replace the 2 return pumps. I have been using sequence dart pumps now for, well, since 2011. And I'm going to replace those with the Vectra L1s, or the large ones, as I like to call them. And those are going to go in place. I just got in another pump for a product review, and I'm tempted to compare the L1 to that pump. Just as a side-by-side, I think it would be kind of cool to see the difference. The system is being topped off with an auto top-off vessel, which I don't know if you can see it in the shot or not, but it's filled to here. When it's up to this point where my finger is pointing, or this high, that's 45 gallons of water. And it's already evaporated, put in this much water in the last day and a half. And that is added to the Smart ATO, which I've been using now for about 3 years. And I really do like that top-off device, because if for some reason it doesn't want to turn off, or if it tries to add too much water too long, it shuts itself off and just beeps until you unplug it. So if you aren't home, it's not going to add water. It's going to give up and beep until you get home to unplug it. And I found that to be really nice. It's never once tried to add too much water. So I totally trust it in that regard. The frag system hasn't been running for 3 years, but it is something you probably want to have an update about. So here you can see some of the corals from the main reef that have been placed in here, which I can then sell to other people in the local area. And now that the parameters have pretty much locked in, things are doing quite well. I am seeing some cyano here and there, which is probably part of the same phosphate issue, but for the most part, the corals seem to be doing okay. Here's the captive bred yellow tang from Hawaii. Remember, this is one of 500 of the very first they'd ever bred. And while she's not perfect, she's really pretty. And she's a little skittish. I wish she'd be out more often. But she definitely eats every single night. She's excited, waiting for me around 9 o'clock for the frozen food to be added to the tank. As you look around in the tank, you'll see there's chalices and montes and LPS and acros and blastos. There's all kinds of things in here. Just things that I want to keep. You can see some of my favorite corals are pretty much in the middle of the tank. I've got that bright green chalice with the orange mouths that just looks stunning under LED lighting. I like that monte right there. I've got a couple more of the chalices on the sand bed ready to share. And there's even one right there that keeps flipping over, and I have to rescue it so they can look alike. It doesn't look anything like the ones on the sand. And then that particular blasto is dealing with all kinds of Valonia and Aptasia and cyano. It's just a mess. But that's what happens in a frag tank. If you've made it this far into the video, I'm about to show you something that I think you'll find useful. But just a quick update. This is the filtration for the 60-gallon frag system. It is standalone, but the apex is connected to it in regards to turning things on and off. You've got your top-off container over here which I could access if I need to, but I never open that. It just, water is pumped in from the RO system to that. And then a smart ATO micro adds water through this tube right into the sump with that little blue light down there. That's how it senses it and adds water. Here are my probes for the apex. This is the Vectra M1 or the medium 1 size pump. The Nio skimmer. I cleaned it out this morning and you can see what's pulled out in the last 12 hours or so. And then this is my tubing. So two things are going to happen in this video at this point that's going to teach you something I think might be useful. Number one, my tubing for each of the dosings, which is alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, they're above the water line and they're in this little bracket that I made. Let me do this right here where you can see I can remove it. And that way I can place it where I want it on the sump. Then when it trickles liquid out, I can actually push the button on my dosers and I can just make sure they're not clogged. Okay, all three worked fine. Down underneath here in all this soot or sediment or detritus is a small little pump. And it's a little tiny guy that I found somewhere at a trade show. And it pushes water straight up and makes that little hill on the water. Little bit of cavitation. I wanted just a little bit of water to tumble there so when it trickles in my additive like alkalinity, it will mix it instead of becoming like white shale on this side of my sump. And I haven't cleaned the sump in a couple of months and you can see there's not like some weird concrete type thing happening from calcium or from alkalinity. It mixes nicely and then travels through to the return zone. So that's kind of a cool thing that you might want to apply to your tank. Get a tiny little pump, plug it in 24 hours a day, and let it just bubble up toward where the liquid goes in from your dosers. That's my suggestion. The other thing, people ask, how do you clean your sump, especially when it's at floor level? And we are at floor level. We are on concrete. So what I have done for the last year or so is I've used this pump that's called a pass-through pump from Cobalt. And I do sell it, so if at some point you want to order one, you can from my website. And water will then enter through one side and come out the other side. And so I'll take two pieces of tubing, which you'll have to have your own tubing that fits this. You tighten it down on each side. And now we've got a way to pump water from the sump and out the other end. But where should it go? I use a filter sock. So here's one that I used not too long ago. And you can see how much stuff I pulled out of the sump. And I'm just going to show you how I do it. Now, to make my life easier, I have the small sock that I'm going to set in my return zone. I've got the pump hooked up, and it's plugged into a power strip with an on-off button. So I can just literally just hit it and turn the pump on. I hope. Yeah, I hear it. So, here we go. I'm going to go ahead. Now, I do have to prime it, which is not the most comfortable thing, which means you have to suck on a hose. But I'm not trying to create a siphon. I'm just trying to get water into the pump itself initially, because that will be the part of my vacuum side. And my water is moving through this hose, through the pump, and then comes out the other end into the sock. So I can just go ahead and put this in. And the other thing you have to watch out for is that sometimes it'll flop out on you. And when it does that, water's going to shoot everywhere, which you don't want to happen. So I'm going to start the siphon to get water in here. And that's all I needed. That's good enough. And now I can put it into the sock and set the sock into the return zone. And then in theory, I'm ready to start vacuuming. Hopefully my pump will turn on like I expected. Yes, it's flowing. So now I can just go ahead and I can suck out all the detritus out of my sump. And it's getting caught in the sock. And I can work in here. I'm not wasting any water. And I'm holding on to the other tube that's in the sock so it doesn't flop out. It does do that. It jumps out at me because I get lax about what I'm doing and I just assume everything's fine, and it was holding fine. And then if for some reason it stops siphoning at all and you don't have the suction going, you may have to take your pump apart, clean it out, right here, and restart it. But that's if you're pulling out things like small snail shells, like stomatellas and so forth. But this right here will allow me to really clean out all this waste in my sump. And it also lets me do it between the baffles, which is another difficult spot to clean out. So I'll show you. I put my thumb over the end, and I submerge it into the baffle. And I'll get down here and pull stuff out. I have the skimmer kind of in my way a little bit right here. I'm trying not to hit it. But, I mean, you get the idea. And you can just take your time, and in about 10 minutes, you've siphoned out all the detritus out of your sump. And that's it. Now your sock is all filthy, and you didn't waste any water, and your sump is better off for it, and you're done. Guys, this weekend I will be in New Jersey for the Reef and Reptile show, which means snakes and spiders and things I don't like. I'll focus on the reef side. I'm actually going to be talking about reef photography. So if you're in the area, be sure to come and have a blast with us. That'll be Saturday. My talk, I believe, is at 1:30 in the afternoon. And I'll put a link in the description of this video of where it will be so you can find it. And I hope you enjoyed the 3-year update of the tank. And I'll see you guys again in an upcoming video, and then we'll see how the tank looks on year number 4. Wow, you watched this all the way through to the very last frame. It takes a special kind of subscriber to sit through one of my 29-minute videos. Be sure to comment below, and if you like this episode, click like. And if you're new, subscribe for more of the same.